We gave out 5 in 5 minutes. We might as well have called the damn video 1 bet in 1 minute. We hit the Trailblazers money line, which I guess made up for one other bet because they were north of 2-1 on a return. But what the freak was that last night? And now you see what's going on here. Boss is going to stand over me while I do these videos, at least today. Boss might be behind me on the odd shop. Fridays, 1 o'clock Eastern with Raza Lafi, myself. So you never know. Like last night was inexcusable. The Discord, it was inexcusable. It was the rare, lone, if I will say, just crater that was buried right in the front of me and behind me and everything. It was awful. God awful. But the boss isn't going to slow me down. Last night's not going to slow me down. We're going to go right back to it. I'm not even going to ask you to hit the thumbs up button, the like button, all that shit. I haven't earned it yet. All right? So go ahead. Start the clock right now. First bet in the first minute of action. We're going to go to the game lines here and actually target this Suns Magic game. It's a 7-point spread for Phoenix, but Chris Paul's up in the air as we're doing this right now, as is Paolo Banchero. You have way too many key guys. We already know Cam's out. The Magic have been dealing with some injuries, so way too many key guys here for me to just ignore that Phoenix could be without their main point guard. Orlando could be without their best player, and that's going to transfer into an under. We just saw the Magic take on a tough squad last night in the Dallas Mavericks. So granted, score aside, or pardon me, it wasn't the Magic, it was the Wizards. But we just saw this the other night here with a tough game with the Orlando Magic. So I was getting at conflating the thing I was getting to with Dallas. Point being, though, as we wind down this play, way too many guys that are volatile right now with health for me to say that I trust anything more than the under. Let's keep it moving here. We'll go to the player props. Now, Odd Shopper loves, if you want to just look at threes here, Odd Shopper loves Julius Randle going under his at 2.5. I think there's an opportunity here to go over 2.5 for RJ Barrett. We have seen launch, and we have seen this Knicks team with an uptick as far as shooting the three. The difference here, of course, is that it's going to be a little bit more so for the standpoint, I think, of who they're taking on in Detroit right now. That's going to be the issue, right? Because people are going to look at the Pistons and say, well, they defend the perimeter well overall in the season, but last couple of games, not so much. That's where the vulnerability will be. Julius Randle is definitely going to have a lot of eyes, a lot of focus on him, but I think RJ Barrett is still going to have enough volume for us to get to 3, and early on, you see that at plus 150. So definitely want to be a part of that. All right, we'll keep it moving here. It's very interesting that the average margin of defeat for the Denver Nuggets on the road, when you look at how much they struggle to cover a spread, my goodness. But the average margin of defeat for the Denver Nuggets on the road is 4.5 points, 4.4 to be exact. Now, I don't want to tempt fate. I don't want to mess with numbers. I don't want to do any of that. What I do want is a team that's 3-2 against the spread at home in the Boston Celtics, a good team at home. And wow, this shot up. This was much more comfortable of a number at -3. I'm just going to drop it to -4. Now, I'm not playing with that 0.4. I'm not playing with that volatility as much. And I'm still working with a possible push and play, but I'm not overspending to drop that half point. A lot of people may not think that half point means a lot. Normally, it doesn't. But in the case here, taking on a bad Nuggets team that's losing games by 4.4 on the road, I want a full part of that portion. All right, we'll keep it moving here and go to a Bucks team that's now down everybody. The big three out from Milwaukee. That's why they're getting 2 on the road against the Spurs. Also, Connaughton out. A couple of guys are out. It's going to open up 2 things for Brook Lopez. And we're going to get to our lotto, our quasi scratch off in a second. But Brook Lopez is going to be out there. We just saw a recent example. I'll go through that game in a second. But Brook Lopez is going to be out there plenty of time. And there's going to be a concerted effort for Carter and anybody else with the basketball to get Lopez some shots from 3. And that's where you factor in the other guys that are out. We already knew Middleton's out. Giannis is out. You add Drew Holiday out to the mix. Connaughton's out. some outside scoring is now depleted exponentially. And yeah, the easiest slide in here is Brook Lopez. And we're going to keep this going into our final play. But just know that the Spurs have been, like the Pistons, defending the perimeter well. But there's been an uptick in lax defending on the outside. Last couple of games, San Antonio, much like Detroit, has become a little more vulnerable. So our last play, and again, I told you, I go back to this one here in the final 40 seconds we have here or so. Brook Lopez, there's the scratch off, plus 285 on the double-double. I go back to this game against the Thunder. Yeah, it took 2 overtimes to complete, and he played north of 40 minutes, what have you. But there are rebounding options that.
Do you remember Lamar Odom's diet? He only ate candy.
Okay.
Yeah, that too. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Stokastic NBA Strategy Show Friday. So I'm hosting, joined here with Adam. While you guys come in, do us a big favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. Now, normally on Fridays, it's a pretty big slate, but today, much more moderate 8 games, which I'm happy about because we've had a lot of oddly sized NBA slates as of late. 8 games, that's right in my wheelhouse, Adam.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. I don't really like 4-game slates, but I can live with it. I'll certainly take that over 13 or 15. But yeah, give me 8 games every day. I really miss, 2 seasons ago when they went to the balanced schedule and you were just getting 8-game slates every single day. Obviously, they've gotten back away from that. But yeah, I love that season, and I'm really excited to have 8 games.
Yeah, 8 games, and we've got some injuries, but nothing crazy. Some players on the injury report that could open up value. But once again, it's not like we're dealing with 30 players that are questionable and a million different value pieces. So good. I like this slate. I'm excited to talk about it. And we could dive right into it, starting with the Denver Nuggets against the Boston Celtics. Now, on the Denver side, there are no notable injuries, but as per usual, we have Jokic to talk about and whether he makes sense as a spend-up option or not today. And here's the biggest issue that I have with Jokic. It's number one, there aren't that many cheap plays where I found it that easy to pay up for him in some of the builds I made this morning. But also something you and I mentioned the other day, his production is just not quite the same this year with Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray in the mix.
Yeah, he's still really, really good. He's a 1.5 fantasy point per minute guy, and that's basically third best in the league behind Giannis and Luka. But he's also priced up. He's at center. And even though this isn't a massive slate, 8 games, you're going to have some good mid-range centers. The other thing that I think makes it difficult is, you mentioned there not being, at least right now, a lot of really cheap value. There is mid-range value because you, once again, have no Drew Holiday. You have no Giannis for the Bucks. So there are a lot of plays that you're going to need to prioritize that are sort of in that mid-range and give you a really high ceiling. Makes it a little bit more difficult to get to the guys at the top as well when that's the case. So to me right now, much more luxury than necessity with Jokic. He's getting 1% ownership on DraftKings. Obviously, if you can get 1% on Jokic into a lineup, that's appealing. But I think it also just reflects how not a necessity he is right now.
And it's one of those things that could change later in the day, depending how injuries break. Maybe an unexpected player or two gets ruled out, and then all of a sudden we have an influx of value that makes it easier to get to him. But as of right now, that's just not the case. And he's somebody I found hard to fit into lineups. And as for the rest of the players on the team, I got to a little bit of Bones Highland, but he's kind of popular, and I think he's picking up a little bit too much ownership. And then also, this is a really difficult matchup. The Celtics should have one of the better defenses in the NBA this year. So I didn't really get to a lot from this team. It's one of the lowest priority teams on the slate, in my opinion.
I'm mostly there with you. I will say I really like the rotations they've been running with regard to Bones Highland recently. He's somebody that earlier in the year we were seeing basically average 18 or 19 minutes per game. Christian Braun has essentially been phased out of the rotation. A couple games ago, he played 3 minutes. Last game, he didn't play at all. As a result, a couple games ago, you got 23 minutes from Highland. Last game, you got 30. Part of that was Jeff Green getting in foul trouble in the first half. So Highland picked up 4.5 extra minutes there. But I do think with the way they're running this rotation, there is a pretty clear path to consistently getting, 22 to 24 minutes from Highland, who has been a really, really good point per minute guy this year. He has like a 30% usage rate, 30% assist percentage. He's averaging about 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. So I do really like the rotations we're seeing from him. Obviously, it's still scary going to a bench guy at 12% ownership and nearly $5,000. But I do like those rotations quite a bit. Michael Porter Jr. getting a little bit of ownership, 6,300. Obviously has a high ceiling. Inconsistent in terms of getting there. I think the same can be said for Aaron Gordon. So the only thing I really like from this team, I think, is Highland. And then the rest of it, if you're mixing in some Murray, Porter, Gordon, Jokic, obviously that's fine. But very, very difficult to prioritize.
Yeah. Highland is the player I got to the most from here, but it was 7% of him when he's projected for 12% ownership right now. So he would be the one guy I would get to if it had to be one. Just for me, at least, that is now a little bit too popular. And I assume other value will be opening up on later in the day. And there is potential for some value on the Celtics side of the game because Malcolm Brogdon is out. He's dealing with a hamstring injury. Now, we've seen Boston kind of play weird rotations this year, at least relative to expectations. I thought that Brogdon was a tremendous pickup in the offseason. I still think that, but I thought he was going to be a guy who was going to play massive minutes for them off the bench. And that just hasn't really been the case this year. So who, if anybody, do you think benefits the most with the absence of Brogdon tonight?
I assume Derek White's minutes are more secure here. You maybe get Peyton Pritchard in the rotation. You can get more minutes for Grant Williams. From a fantasy standpoint, I think most likely $4,000 Derek White is the biggest beneficiary. He's somebody that has played around 28 minutes per game this year when everybody's healthy. You could certainly just see him pick up, several more minutes.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense in terms of he is the player I got to the most when I was running lineups. And by the way, also, Derek White weirdly projected for no ownership right now. If that is going to be the case, if he's going to be basically totally unowned on DraftKings and FanDuel, then that is also reason for me to want to get there as potential contrarian option. Because right now, Derek White is projected for 2% ownership over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, we have him projected for 1% ownership. I don't know for sure he's going to get the extra minutes, but just the chance that he does, and considering how cheap he is on both sides, I think that that's sensible. And then the other guys on the Celtics are players that I'm typically getting to anyway. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. I prefer Brown relative to his price. Something that you had brought me onto early on in the season about Jaylen Brown and the usage he's had this year. It's gone up, and he's not really ever seen an increase in price. His last two games, for instance, 32 and 34% usage rate. He's taking a lot of shots. He rebounds, he assists. There's defensive stats there. He's pretty consistently been underpriced, and I think that he is somebody that makes sense in like that upper mid range.
Yeah, I've been getting him a lot recently. I don't know that he's come through for me once, but 8,200 shooting guard, small forward. He is getting 15% ownership on this slate, so it's not one of those slates like he's been really low owned on recently, but 1.12 DraftKings points per minute, 30% usage. I do really like the ceiling there. And going back to the Derek White thing, one thing that I do think is important to mention, he has come off the bench in each of their last two games. And so that does make me a little bit more concerned with his playing time because a lot of his minutes were coming alongside Brogdon. And obviously, if he's already on the floor, he can't be out there twice. So that's an issue, but I still think there should be a few more minutes available.
Yeah, and then also extra usage available in that second unit because that has been when Brogdon's had the ball in his hand. As far as a value play go, I know you mentioned Peyton Pritchard. I think that he makes some sense. Is there a chance that Grant Williams or Al Horford see increased minutes if the Celtics just decide to go bigger with the absence of Brogdon?
I think so. Particularly Williams. I mean, he's somebody that we know can play multiple positions. So kind of regardless of what lineup they go with, you can get more Grant Williams. He's a 0.72 DraftKings point per minute guy. He is not getting any ownership at 4,100. I think that he's also somebody that can benefit. I just sort of like Derek White's production a little bit more, although he hasn't really been good this year either. But, from previous years, I expect Derek White to be better than Grant Williams from a fantasy standpoint.
38 minutes 2 games ago for Grant Williams. Now, last game, and by the way, last game, because I remember that you would like Jaylen Brown, we were doing the deep dive on Wednesday. He was looking like he was going to have a really big game. The issue is just that the Celtics ended up beating the Pistons in a fairly one-sided game. So we put up 46 fantasy points. He just didn't get to play the end of the game because it was a blowout, or else he was probably on pace to have a pretty big game in that spot. But let's see what the starting lineup looks like for the Celtics. I assume they're going to stick with Grant Williams there. But in the event they do go back to Derek White would look really strong because, number one, he'd be starting again, but then point two, potential for more minutes just because of the absence of Malcolm Brogdon.
Yeah, and as far as Williams' playing time last game, he was in massive foul trouble, so he only played 21 minutes, but probably playing 30 plus here.
Yeah. like I said, 38 2 games ago. So there's clearly ceiling for playing time there. It's just that he kind of sucks when he's on the court. But if you get 38 minutes, you don't have to be a very good fantasy producer to do some damage, at least relative to his price point. And anything else you want to talk about when it comes to Boston?
Obligatory mention that Jason Tatum is really, really good.
Yeah. If you have him in, like I got him in around 10% of my lineups when I was doing builds this morning. If that's what you get to, totally makes sense. He's not going to be a high priority for me, but in lineups I have him, it's not going to be problematic. Next game, the Phoenix Suns against the Orlando Magic. We have Chris Paul listed as questionable. Paul missed last game with a heel injury and seems like he's a true 50-50 for tonight's game. What ends up happening if he is ruled out? Campaign presumably is going to be the starter, was in that role, was massive chalk the other day. He's been priced up a little bit. Would you still want to get to him if Paul is out?
Yeah, I would want to go right back there if Paul's out. Probably not at the 75% clip that I did last time, but you're still talking about somebody that averages about a fantasy point per minute and around 30 minutes per game in his starts without Paul going back to last season. So if Paul's out, I do think you go right back to Cameron Payne.
In 35 minutes, scored 46 fantasy points, 22% usage rate, 8 assists, 6 rebounds. So he was doing a little bit of everything for them. And it's a good matchup today against the Orlando Magic. So that's something else that would play in his benefit. Now, as for the other players on the team, who else would you expect to see a pretty big bump if there is no Chris Paul?
Yeah, I mean, if there's no Paul, I think you get a bump for Booker and for Ayton as well. Ayton's really cheap still at 6,200. Booker's gotten a little bit more expensive at 9,400. And there's obviously a lot of players in that range that are going to look good, but Booker will look better if CP3 is out. Mikal Bridges is coming off of a massive game last time out. I'm not as confident in him getting increased production because, obviously there is usage and everything to go around, but you're still dealing with a high usage DeAndre Ayton and a high usage Devin Booker. The ceiling certainly there for Bridges. He showed that last game, but I don't expect that to be the norm, whereas I do certainly expect better production from Ayton and Booker.
The thing that was crazy about the last Bridges game, he played 42 minutes. And I think some of it too was just he was playing so well they left him on the court. But there was a lot of stuff that I would consider to be fairly fluky from a fantasy perspective. The 42 minutes, I wouldn't expect that to repeat. The 24% usage rate, wouldn't expect that to repeat. He made 60% of his shots, wouldn't expect that to repeat. He also had 5 stocks. He had 4 steals and a block. So everything went in the favor of Mikal Bridges, and now his price has gone way up. If he's going to end up picking up ownership in the event that Chris Paul is out, I expect I would be underweight to the field on Bridges just because I think there was so much that was fluky about last game.
Yeah, and to your point with the usage, he had a 24% usage rate, which on its face, you kind of say, okay, that's probably higher than we can expect on average from Bridges. But then you look at what the other guys did. DeAndre Ayton only had a 17% usage rate. His usage rate is much higher than that this year in general. Chris Paul, not being out there, you could make the argument that not having arguably the best point guard to ever play isn't great for Ayton, but it's certainly not going to cause him to consistently go from 24, 25% usage down to 17. Devin Booker had a 28% usage rate. That's fine, but you're going to get plenty of games where he's over 30 without Chris Paul. So it's pretty easy to see that. I guess my point is if Ayton had a mid-20s usage rate and Booker was at 30% and Bridges still somehow got to 24, it would be okay, well, maybe this can happen again. But you can pretty clearly see the guys that are going to get that usage consistently weren't getting it in that game.
And Ayton's somebody I expect that I'm going to like on this slate regardless. He's fairly cheap and he's getting some ownership as well. Over on DK's projected for 24% ownership, 18% on FanDuel, but 6,200 on DK, 6,500 on FanDuel. This is just a cheaper price than we typically see from DeAndre Ayton, and I think it's a good buy low spot.
Agreed.
Anything else from the Suns you want to talk about, or how about what we do with Chris Paul if he ends up playing?
If Paul ends up playing, I think this team mostly becomes pretty uninteresting. 7,800 is a pretty healthy price tag on Paul. Cameron Payne being active does lower Paul's minutes projection by a minute or two. Devin Booker is expensive. I still like Ayton at 6,200, but he's probably the only guy I'm really getting to if Paul's in.
On the other side of the game, we've got injuries for the Magic as well, and it's a big one because Paulo Banchero is injured, and he has done pretty much everything for them. Usage, assists, rebound. He's filling up the box score in multiple different ways. If he is not able to play, the matchup clearly isn't ideal against Phoenix, but there's a big void to fill. Which players would stand out the most if we don't get Banchero in the lineup?
So it's a nice bump in usage for pretty much everybody in the starting lineup. Without Banchero on the floor this year, 26% usage rate for Wendell Carter Jr., 29.7% for Franz Wagner. Those two would really stand out. Jalen Suggs has only played 46 minutes without him, but he also has a 26.5% usage rate. So all three of those guys are just going to look better if Banchero sits because there is a lot of usage to go around.
The player I'm starting to get concerned about is Bol. From a fantasy perspective, I just don't know how to project his minutes because his last 3 games, he played 37 against the Kings. I know that was an overtime game, but still 37. But the game before that, he played 19. Now, the last 2 games, he's played 21 and 25 minutes. I get that he's a really good points per minute fantasy producer, but it's just going to be hard for me to give him the minutes, whether Banchero's in the lineup or not.
Yeah, we've kind of seen that since Jalen Suggs came back, that his playing time hasn't been particularly consistent. And even last game where you didn't have Banchero, you got 25 minutes, which is fine, but like he still didn't play at all in the fourth quarter. Terrence Ross off the bench played the final 17 minutes of that game. Caleb Houston played the entire fourth quarter. Obviously, neither of those things have to happen again, but it's clearly not been a priority to get Bol those minutes.
Yeah, and then if we do see Banchero in the lineup, he's been priced to a point now where I don't know that I'm going to get to a whole bunch of them against the Phoenix Suns. And then it would also just hurt a lot of the other players on the team been priced up at this point. But Banchero, what would you make of him and the Magic if he's in the lineup?
I think it's kind of like Phoenix on the other side. It becomes a team that isn't really that interesting if he's in because, like you said, he's priced up and the other guys are relatively expensive as well for a decrease in production if he's out there. Overall this season, Wagner has a 24% usage rate, so that's 5 points lower than when Banchero's not on the floor. Wendell Carter Jr. is at 21%, so again, 5 points lower than when Banchero's not on the floor. Jalen Suggs, 22.9, so like 4 points lower. You just see all of these guys take a pretty substantial hit because Banchero has a 30.5% usage rate. So I think they're all pretty much correctly priced, if not overpriced, if he's in.
Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you guys do not have a Prize Picks account yet, you can sign up clicking on the link below. That'll get you up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And then we've got all the tools you need over at Stokastic to build some winning player prop cards over at Prize Picks. We've got projections for over-unders for all the different player props over at Prize Picks. It's going to tell you what we have them projected for, the percentage odds of those props to go over or under. So use some of those, you build a player prop card over on Prize Picks, make some money, but also make sure to sign up by clicking on the link below so you get that deposit bonus when you first sign up. The next game on the slate to hit on, we have the Detroit Pistons against the New York Knicks. Now, Adam, when it comes to Detroit, Cade Cunningham, last game notwithstanding, because he absolutely sucked against Boston.
Yes, he did.
Incredibly terrible game from Cade Cunningham. He's now listed as questionable on the injury report. And in general this year, he has been pivotal to everything the Pistons do. He's the usage, the assists, the rebounds. If he is not able to play, and I'm going to chalk up his last game just to him being injured. I think it's reasonable to think that was the reason that he struggled so much. And now he pops up as questionable on the injury report. Who do we think takes on a lot more of that playmaking and usage responsibility if there is no Cade out there?
I'd expect it to be Jaden Ivey primarily. He's been playing really well recently anyway. He's been getting more minutes. I would expect the ball to be in his hands more. Without Cade on the floor this year, Ivey's played 64 minutes. He has a 36.4% usage rate and a 27% assist percentage. Again, I don't take those exact rates as gospel because you're talking about 64 minutes, but I certainly take that trend where, he's just doing everything. I would expect that to be the case because you think about who else is on the floor. Isaiah Stewart's not a high usage guy. Bojan Bogdanovic isn't creating for himself. He's taking threes if you pass him the ball. There's just not really anybody else out there taking shots. Saddiq Bey is not a particularly high usage guy either. So I expect it to be the Jaden Ivey show if Cunningham's out.
And if Cunningham plays, I'm going to like him a lot for tournaments. He is $7,800 on FanDuel, which is still a little bit on the cheap side, but he's $7,200 on DK. Last game notwithstanding, he has had a lot of really big fantasy games. Now, the first quarters for him have pretty consistently been terrible this year. Even a lot of his big games, he's done nothing in the first quarter. But that aside, I think that Cade Cunningham should be a really good fantasy player this year. And it doesn't matter that he's going to shoot inefficiently from the field. That seems like just who he is at this point. But this Pistons team has so little talent and is so bad that Cade Cunningham is going to have big fantasy games when he's on the court. And I think people might want to stray away from him just because he has the questionable tag and the fact that he sucked so much last game.
Yeah, and I like getting back there. I mean, he's one of these guys where Yes, he's an inconsistent shooter, like you said, but he's averaging 1.14 DraftKings points per minute on a 49.2% true shooting percentage. To me, that just screams upside because he's going to have games where that shot falls and he just destroys that, point per minute production. And on average, when his shot's not falling, he's still been a very productive player. You have a 30.5% assist percentage to fall back on, 29.5% usage. So even if you are inefficient, you're still going to get your points just through volume. So I think he looks really good if he does play.
And then one other thing that's of note to me here is that Marvin Bagley is listed as questionable. He could be making his season debut. If he does end up starting, or not starting, but playing, because I don't think he would start his first game back, although it is possible. If he's just in the rotation, what does that mean for the other big men on the Pistons?
Not entirely sure. I assume that he would be playing the four. Like, I don't think he's taking Jalen Duren's minutes. I don't think he's taking Isaiah Stewart's minutes. I assume that you're just either getting like Livers or Diallo kicked out of the rotation and Bagley replacing them, or you're getting him in addition to those guys, in which case that trend that I talked about recently where Detroit plays their starters really heavy minutes, that goes out the window. I kind of think that's going to be the case anyway, because you also have Alec Burks probable today. He hasn't been in the rotation at all this year. So I'm curious to see, do they just replace guys or do they add to the rotation? With them being such a not good team, I'm kind of nervous that they just add to the rotation because who really cares? So that is one just general negative here for the secondary players on the Pistons. I don't care about it from a Cade Cunningham standpoint or a Jaden Ivey standpoint, but it does kind of make me less interested in the Bogdanovich and Bay type guys.
And the Pistons are playing the Knicks today. I don't know what to make of the Knicks front court. Mitchell Robinson's out. It feels like there should be value in the front court with him missing. But somehow Isaiah Hartenstein is playing less minutes now that Mitchell Robinson is out, which just makes no sense. So the first game without Robinson, Hartenstein starts. He plays 39 minutes, puts up a big fantasy game. The next game, he comes off the bench. He does get into some foul trouble, but still just plays 21 minutes. Then last game, he plays a season low 14 and a half minutes. I don't really understand this situation at all. How is it that Mitchell Robinson gets hurt? The starting center and the backup center, Hartenstein, ends up seeing a decrease in playing time. What do you make of this Knicks front court rotation? Because I don't really know what to do with it.
Yeah, I have no idea what to make of it. When they moved Hartenstein back to the bench the other day, I was like, okay, they're going to give Sims, 21, 22 minutes. Hartenstein's going to get like 26 and just sort of play his normal minutes. I'm with you. I don't know how he now plays fewer minutes. I don't think that continues, but also maybe it does. I have no idea. I don't know why it's happening in the first place, but it does make it obviously really difficult to get to him at 5,500 unless he were to be put back in the starting lineup. Julius Randle at 7,900, RJ Barrett at 6,600. I think both look okay. Randle could play more minutes. We saw that in that first game. You were getting a lot of Obi Toppin and Julius Randle. He got up to like 40 minutes. That has pretty much disappeared though. Like last game, he played 31 minutes, lost 4 minutes to garbage time. So you're probably looking at like 35 minutes if that game was close. That's a little bit above his season average. And I think that does continue, but I still don't think that you can be going to like 37 minutes on Randle like we used to be able to.
Yeah, no real priorities here for me. And the bench also total disaster. Like could be Obi Toppin who plays backup center minutes. But the other thing too is the rotation has been so inconsistent that I'm concerned that if I project Toppin to play more minutes and he ends up in my lineups, that it could just as easily be Hartenstein who plays the backup center minutes again. So I'm going to tread carefully with the backup centers and probably not really get much of any of it. Anything else from the Knicks do you want to talk about?
Jalen Brunson at 6,800 does look pretty good. Cam Reddish, if he starts, is only 3,100. He's been garbage this year in terms of fantasy production, but he does have a path to upper 20s minutes if he starts. And right now, we don't really have other cheap value.
Do you remember when people were going crazy because the Knicks got Cam Reddish for just one first round pick?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, everybody was convinced that, not everybody, but it seemed like the consensus opinion was that the Knicks had just totally pulled a heist on the Atlanta Hawks because they got Cam Reddish for just one first round pick, and the Knicks, he just wasn't good enough to even be in the Knicks rotation when the Knicks sucked last year. So Reddish, yeah, it definitely has talent and ability, but it hasn't really panned out to this point. And to your point, if he starts, sure, he's cheap, he would make sense for value, but another guy, if he comes off the bench, would be hard to project minutes there.
Agreed. And to Tokyo Swan said he thinks they're just going to run Jericho Sims again. I mean, he played 26 minutes, including garbage time. Like, he's probably going to play 22 minutes here. The minutes are there for Hartenstein if the Knicks want to give them to him.
Yeah, Thibodeau's so difficult to figure out. There was a point in time, remember, his thing was just, hey, I just play the starters a million minutes. And now it's, like he still plays his starters pretty big minutes, but the bench players are so inconsistent that it's almost impossible to project. I've gotten just crushed trying to project who's going to play minutes between Toppin and Hartenstein as of late. I just hope that I don't have to go there and I can just roster other value plays.
Yeah, I'm with you. The first game that Robinson was out, I played like 40% Toppin. He was 4% owned. He played like 16 minutes. I'm like, all right, I was wrong. Next game, he plays 25 minutes and just smashes it. No ownership, and I obviously don't have him.
Yeah, it's just been hard. There's no consistency to it. The next game, the Toronto Raptors against the Oklahoma City Thunder. From the Toronto side of the game, Pascal Siakam's out. He's been out for a couple of games, but there's still an impact here. Fred VanVleet is a totally different player as of late with Pascal Siakam off the court, because something that you and I had talked about when Siakam was still healthy, that we were just doubting whether we would see Fred VanVleet be that same fantasy guy that he had been in the past, because the usage was down. He was getting to the rim a lot less. And it just seems like there's a flip that he was able to switch when Siakam got out. Maybe he was saving himself for these kind of situations, maybe pacing himself a little bit because he got hurt last year and doesn't want to totally run himself into the ground in the regular season. But right now that they need VanVleet, he is playing bigger minutes. His usage is up higher. So guys like him, Barnes, Anunoby, surely better spots for them. But for DFS purposes, what's the priority here?
Yeah, so I mean, Siakam being out obviously is huge here. You have seen the salaries go up a bit, but the entire offense was running through Siakam. So this is a situation where you see a bump in assist percentage for guys. You see a bump in usage rate. Without him on the floor this year, Anunoby has a 23% usage rate, so that's up. VanVleet has a 26% usage rate and a 35% assist percentage. Both of those numbers look really good. Scotty Barnes' assist percentage goes from like 18% to 26%. He's only averaged 1 fantasy point per minute, but he has a 44.9% true shooting percentage in those 161 minutes. That number has to go up. Gary Trent's got a 23% usage rate. So all 4 of those guys are still going to look good, even at their increased salaries. One thing that does stand out from their rotation, I had talked about it last game. Brandon Katz said I was wrong. Turns out I was right. Otto Porter played like 24 minutes off the bench. He's 3,600. He's not a great point per minute guy. But 81 minutes without Siakam on the floor this year, 0.77 DraftKings points per minute for Porter. Precious Achiuwa also out here. I think you once again probably see mid-20s minutes from Porter at a really cheap price tag.
I think a good point that you'd made about the game on Wednesday as well is that we saw the tail end of a back-to-back. So 11-6, 11-7. The Raptors were in a blowout against the Bulls. They were getting blown out. They played Otto Porter in garbage time. And we were speculating that, or at least you were the one who brought it up, that there's clearly an effort to get Porter more involved. The fact that he then played 24 minutes last game, I just think the minutes are there to stay. I think he's going to play these minutes. And to your point, yeah, not a great fantasy producer, but if we do get to lock and there isn't all that much value on the slate, you could do much worse than an Otto Porter Jr. to sub 4K price tag getting 24 to 26 minutes.
Yeah, and in that same vein, Thad Young, 3,100, reemerged from nowhere and played 27 minutes in that game. Again, no Precious Achiuwa, who only played 13 minutes in that game, but there's minutes available for both of those guys. Young getting 15% ownership right now, Porter getting 5. Young is the better point per minute guy, at least historically. He's barely played this year, but both of those guys look like very reasonable value options, especially if other stuff doesn't open up.
Yeah, and I should point out that it's an overall just shorthanded Raptors front court, because in addition to Pascal Siakam being out, you mentioned there Achiuwa, he seemed to suffer a pretty significant ankle injury last game, so he's going to be out for a couple of months. Kem Birch is also out, so there aren't that many guys for them to go to in the front court here. We've got Otto Porter, we've got Thad Young, Christian Koloko, Chris Boucher, just much less options than we typically see Nick Nurse have at his disposal. One other guy I do like getting to, actually the player who I was getting the most exposure to when I ran lineups this morning, Gary Trent. Trent is the one player who hasn't really seen a significant price increase since the injury to Pascal Siakam. So still being able to roster him at sub 6K, particularly on DraftKings where we're getting the 3-point bonus. I think Trent is a pretty solid mid-range option.
Yeah, the ceiling's certainly there because we know that you're just going to have Gary Trent games where he's knocking down shots and he takes a lot of shots. The reason I think that you haven't really seen that price move is that he's like the one guy that doesn't do anything in the way of peripherals. Even without Siakam, 9% assist percentage, 3.5% rebounding percentage. You get, a 10% rebounding percentage from Anunoby, 35% assist percentage from VanVleet, 26 from Barnes. So Trent is solely getting there on scoring, but he's also very capable of it. We've seen that plenty of times in the past.
Yeah, I see it the exact same way. So Gary Trent, He is currently projected to be fairly popular on both sites, but nothing really crazy. Trent is 19% owned right now on DraftKings. FanDuel a little more popular at 25% projected ownership. Definitely somebody I would have in cash games, at least at the moment, if things weren't to change. On the other side, when it comes to the Oklahoma City Thunder, we've seen SGA has just been ridiculous this year. So everything is coming up SGA. He's now the front runner to win Most Improved Player of the Year. The minutes have been insanely high. The usage is high this year. The assist rate, the rebound rate. He is doing just about everything for this team. Is he somebody you want to pay up for tonight?
Yeah, his salary's actually dropped a little bit on DraftKings, which is nice, coming in at 9,200. Not a great matchup against Toronto, obviously, but SGA has been fantastic. The rates do go down a bit when he's on the floor with Josh Giddey, but you're talking about going down to like 1.3 DraftKings points per minute, so still extremely good, especially for this price tag. Overall this year, 1.4 DraftKings points per minute, 33% usage rate, 26% assist percentage. I think, despite the matchup, SGA does look good. Right now, he's only pulling about 12% ownership, so I do like getting there.
Yeah, SGA, a little bit different looking on FanDuel compared to DK. FanDuel, he's priced over 10K right now, but the DraftKings price point definitely does look appealing to me. And, I'm a pretty big fan of Josh Giddey's potential for fantasy because he's somebody who also could do a little bit of everything. He could score, rebound, assist. Now, in general, he's been really down this year, but finally broke out a little bit last game. It was an overtime game, but still 44 minutes, ended up putting up 46 fantasy points. He had 15 rebounds. He had 6 assists. I like getting to Josh Giddey here, and he's still not picking up all that much ownership.
Yeah, I mean, played about 34 minutes in regulation, and it's not like he's been bad from a fantasy standpoint this year. He's averaging a fantasy point per minute, 23% usage rate, 26% assist percentage, 11% rebounding percentage, 46% true shooting percentage. And I mean, the guy can't score efficiently, so that's probably going to come up a little bit, but not a massive amount. But the point being, he gets there in a variety of ways, and then he is just going to have some games where he outshoots his average and puts up big games. So I'm with you. Seeing the playing time, seeing still just a $6,500 price tag and not a lot of ownership, I do like the idea of starting to get to some Giddey.
Yeah, he was one of the things I got right on the Wednesday slate was I was getting to a decent amount of Giddey, and he came through.
And then it didn't even matter because Javon Carter had the best game he will ever play.
Yeah, and Javon Carter, did you see we're going to be talking about that game next, but did you see the interview with Javon Carter after the game also?
When he woke up?
Yeah, it was amazing. The reporter said, when did you realize that it was going to be your day and that you were going to have this going for you tonight? And he's like, when I woke up, and totally straight face, delivered it. There was no hesitation, just answers like, I like this guy. It made me feel better about not getting a lot of exposure to a massive chalk Javon Carter because I kind of like him now.
Yeah.
Anybody else on OKC that you want to get to for today?
No.
All right, so let's talk about the Milwaukee Bucks situation. Giannis still out. Jrue Holiday still out. And we saw just really weird production and minutes allocations for the Bucks because with those guys out last game, you would just figure, all right, Bobby, if they're going to win, Bobby Portis has to do a little bit of everything for them. Not only was that not the case, Bobby Portis got benched down the stretch of that game and would have totally been a dud if it was not for the overtime situation. But Bobby Portis, now priced up on both DraftKings and FanDuel, I still think he makes some semblance of sense. Javon Carter, we were just talking about him. I think last game was a total facade. If he is going to pick up ownership today at $5,300, which it appears he is going to, I do not want to play nearly as much as Javon Carter as the field is.
Yeah, so it is interesting. He's played 193 minutes without Giannis, Jrue, or Middleton on the floor since last year. 1.08 DraftKings points per minute. Obviously, that's very, very heavily influenced by the 40 whatever minutes he played last game, 45 minutes. So you're talking, 20%, 25% basically of those minutes being last game. But he does have a 32.6% assist percentage. I think that there's still going to be some production there, but he is up to 5,300, so not the best price point. I'm definitely going right back to Bobby Portis. Like you said, the rotation last game was really weird, but 187 minutes since last year without any of those guys on the floor. 1.17 DraftKings points per minute, 28% usage, 19% rebounding percentage. He is getting a lot of ownership again. His salary only increased $200 on DraftKings, so I'm going back to him. Hopefully it goes much better than it did last time. Brook Lopez looks good again. His salary did jump to $6,300, but he looks like a solid option as well. 92 minutes without those guys, 0.98 DraftKings points per minute.
And by the way, the other issue I have with Carter, it's not even because I agree with you. He should project fairly decently. but I don't think it warrants. He's currently 30% projected owned on DraftKings, the second most popular player on the slate. On FanDuel, he's projected for 41% ownership. For a guy that historically hasn't been a great fantasy producer across his entire career, it's hard for me to think that he's worth being in 41% of lineups on FanDuel or 30% of lineups on DraftKings. To me, it's just the ownership I have an issue with right now.
Yeah, I'm there with you. Like, I think he projects well, but I think he's at a price point now where you probably can find some reasonable pivots that are lower owned.
Are there any cheap guys that stand out to you like getting to from Milwaukee?
I don't really think so. Jordan Morrow only played 17 minutes last game. Thought there was a chance he'd play more. I guess today there is a chance he plays more, but very, very difficult to count on that. George Hill not getting much ownership. He's still cheap. He's also just terrible from a fantasy standpoint. 0.72 DraftKings points per minute in 229 minutes without Giannis, Drew, or Middleton on the floor since last year. If you want to just, hope he runs into a big game at much less ownership than Javon Carter, then by all means, but I don't have any confidence in that happening. Beauchamp's getting 5% ownership, but probably should be. So nothing that really stands out.
And on the other side of the game, when it comes to San Antonio Spurs, they've got a healthy lineup today, which is not something we've seen a whole lot of from the Spurs this year. But Jakob Poeltl, Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Trey Jones, they are all going to be in the lineup. I have a contrarian play I like here. Now, the probability of it hitting, I don't think is super high, but nobody's playing Jeremy Sochan right now. And he is playing minutes. He got over 30 last game, and I think there's that kind of potential for him to get that sort of playing time. And when you also consider he's $3,800 right now on DraftKings, and once again, no ownership. FanDuel a little bit different where he's 4,500. But if we're going to be stretched for value, I kind of have some interest in Sochan if he's going to be totally unowned.
Yeah, I don't hate it. Like, you basically just need him to avoid foul trouble, which is a really big if. But like you said, he played 30 minutes last game. Those minutes are there if he can avoid foul trouble. He's not a great point per minute guy either, but he's cheap. He's not getting ownership. 0.71 DraftKings points per minute. I'm with you. Like, I don't think it works out a lot, but he probably should be getting a little bit more ownership than he is.
Yeah, and then another thing to consider also, this is just an easy matchup against the Bucks. Usually the Bucks present a really difficult matchup, not when Drew Holiday and Giannis are both out. And that's something that's always going to be hard to project for is what does a matchup look like? How should a matchup be adjusted for a team when they're facing a team that's missing such good defenders and key players like Giannis and Drew? It's easy to say what happens to the Bucks offense when those guys are out. It's a little harder to quantify what it means for the Spurs. And I do think there are guys from San Antonio here, Trey Jones, Poeltl, Vassell, Keldon Johnson. I don't have any of them as being priorities, but all of them were guys that were getting into 10 to 15% of my lineups.
Yeah, and these are all guys that get plenty of opportunities here. Devin Vassell's been very good this year when healthy, averaging 1.14 DraftKings points per minute. Trey Jones is at about a fantasy point per minute. Keldon Johnson's at 1.12. Poeltl's at 1.14. He does, of course, have the matchup against an actually healthy Brook Lopez, but still plenty of upside there. So I think all of those guys are pretty interesting. Devin Vassell, probably the one that I would get to first, either him or Keldon Johnson. And then also, if you're looking for value, still no Zach Collins. You have Charles Bassey pulling about 9% ownership here, $3,400. He's always been a good point per minute guy. It's just a matter of him getting on the floor. He played 16 minutes as the backup center last game. Again, he's the kind of guy where probably as the day goes on, other value opens up and you kind of just forget about Charles Bassey. But the way it looks right now, I have no issue mixing him into some lineups.
Anything else you want to talk about from the Spurs?
Nope.
Okay, so some of these next few spots are just really not going to be all that interesting for me. The next one, the Minnesota Timberwolves. The team's been a mess this year, and you and I were talking about it briefly before we started. Basically, every single player on the Timberwolves is having a career worst three-point shooting season, and I don't know what to attribute that to. Is it because the floor spacing is worse with Rudy Gobert? Potentially. Is it bad variance? Also potentially. Is it a combination of both? Probably that's what's most likely. But until this team really gets some of its chemistry sorted out, it's going to be hard for me to get there because none of the players are going to project exceptionally well relative to their salaries.
Yeah, it's just a really difficult team to get to when everybody's healthy. One, they obviously haven't been performing all that well. But two, you just have, usage being spread around between Edwards and Towns and then some going to Russell. The only thing that really stands out pricing wise to me from this team is that Edwards is 7,500. He's getting 12% ownership. Obviously he's, had his issues this year, but that is a cheap price tag for somebody that at least has the talent that Edwards does. So not overly confident in him, but I do think he's getting a little bit too cheap. He's still averaged 1 fantasy point per minute this year with a 26.5% usage rate, and he's giving you 35, 36 minutes most games.
Yeah, it's one of the teams I'm getting the least amount of exposure to, which I think it's just going to be the case in games where they're all healthy. And then something else also, some of these guys are more expensive than they were a few games ago because Gobert was out and now it just returns. Like Karl Anthony Towns was cheaper prior to that. And then the role players also for Minnesota. I know Naz Reid is out, but I don't think anybody benefits in any kind of real significant way that I would want to get to. Any of the role players that you think I'm missing on here from Minnesota?
No, I don't think so.
All right, let's move on to the Memphis side of the game then. In Memphis, another team that's pretty healthy for today. Jaren Jackson Jr. is out, but he's been out all season, is going to be out for an extended period of time. As for the high end guys, Morant, you could always spend up for him in some lineups. Desmond Bane has been incredible this year, but another team where I'm not really seeing any priorities.
No, it's just, Desmond Bane averaging 1.2 DraftKings points per minute overall this year. Certainly happy to get him. He's getting 12% ownership, but probably priced about where he should be. Steven Adams, the only other guy on this team getting double-digit ownership. 5,400, the rebounding upside that you get with Adams. Always happy to get to some John Morant. Dylan Brooks is going to shoot. Yeah, I don't know. I think that all four of those guys are like solid plays, but none of them look like priorities to me.
Yeah, and if you guys want access to stuff like our player projections, our ownership projections, we've got our lineup generator now, which is the best way to build lineups as quickly as possible. If you guys don't have time to hand build your lineups, whatever may be leading up to slate, we've got our lineup builder. We're just a couple clicks of the button, and it is going to build lineups for you that are plus EV based on our simulations. You can get access to all of that for free for 3 days. But other ways to get involved over at Stokastic, sign up at BetMGM because we have a partnership with them right now where if you sign up by clicking on the link below, you get $1,000 risk-free bet, the first bet you place there. So if it loses, you get refunded up to $1,000. We also get 2 free months of Stokastic Plus Platinum package. So there's a lot of ways to get access to all of our tools at a really cheap cost. Free if you take advantage of the 3-day free offer, or sign up at BetMGM and get 2 months free over at Stokastic. Just make sure to click on the link below so you get credited for the 2 free months when you sign up. Couple games left to talk about. And the next one, another spot that I don't really have a ton of interest in right now, the Cleveland Cavaliers against the Golden State Warriors. And it's hard for me to know exactly what to make of Darius Garland alongside Donovan Mitchell. He was really chalky last game and ultimately ended up struggling. Only shot 1 of 9 from the field. His price has also come up a little bit. He's 7,400. So I got to some of him in lineups, but he's also looks like he's going to be fairly popular again today. He might be a little bit overowned.
Yeah, I mean, I still like him here. 7,400, I think, is a reasonable price tag. So far this year, he's played 166 minutes. He's averaged 1 fantasy point per minute, 26% usage, 38.5% assist percentage. If you go back to previous seasons and just pretend Donovan Mitchell's name is Colin Sexton, Garland also averaged about a fantasy point per minute when he played with Sexton. Obviously different players, but Sexton kind of serves that role as a high usage guy playing alongside Garland. So I'm pretty comfortable expecting around the fantasy point per minute. Most games, I think you're getting around 36 minutes from him. It's a fast-paced Golden State team on the other side. So I like getting back to Garland. I think 18% ownership is pretty reasonable at 7,400.
Yeah, he'll definitely be in some lineups. I think I'll probably end up being underweight to the field on him. Kind of surprised that we're seeing as much ownership going to guys like Evan Mobley and Kevin Love right now. Well, I guess Love has had some big games recently that's getting people there, but 21 minutes last game, I don't know that makes him somebody I want to play in 15% of lineups where he's projected right now. Evan Mobley also picking up double-digit ownership. Jared Allen at 12%. What do you make of these other guys that are getting some love?
I think they're just a little bit cheap. And then it's also just that right now we don't have a ton of value on this slate. So somebody like Kevin Love, if he's going to play low 20s in minutes at 4,800, is going to look pretty good. We have been seeing him play a bit alongside Jared Allen, which is nice for his playing time. He's clearly a good point per minute guy. He's averaging 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. It's just a matter of how many minutes is he going to be on the floor for. But I think he's a little bit underpriced still. Same goes for Mobley. He hasn't been a great fantasy guy this year, but he's still averaging 0.9 DraftKings points per minute. If he's able to avoid foul trouble and this game's competitive, you're probably getting 35 minutes from him at 5,700. Just is going to project as a good option.
And on the other side of the game, when it comes to the Warriors bench is so abysmal this year. This might be the worst bench in the entire NBA. And last year they had a great bench, but losing guys like Otto Porter Jr., losing guys like Gary Payton, they have just not been able to maintain leads. Their offense, I think amongst all offensive units in the NBA, they're second in offensive efficiency and third in defensive efficiency. We're just talking about starting fives. And then they go to the bench and shit falls apart in a hurry. Jordan Poole has been terrible this year. As a result, here's where I think there's a DFS tie-in. It looks like the starters are just going to start playing more minutes right now because they can't go to the bench and maintain leads. And this is also a point where obviously it's still fairly early in the season, but the Warriors have to be a little bit concerned when they're just not winning games. And not only are they not winning games, they're losing against really shitty teams. Eventually, they're going to have to start winning games. And it looks like there's a change from Steve Kerr to where early in the year, it looked like they were going to rest guys. They were going to bring them on slowly. Things have changed in a hurry in terms of playing time for the starters lately.
Yeah, for sure. They do get DiVincenzo back today, or they're expected to, so that should help a bit. But yeah, that was already sort of a trend that we've seen with Kevon Looney, where Looney's somebody that like should or you expected him to just consistently play like 22, 23 minutes per game. But then in competitive games or games that they have actually won and had the lead late, you're just seeing him play like 28 minutes, because if he's not on the floor, their defense gets worse, and you're bringing in one of the bench guys who's just been garbage. So you'd already seen that trend there. And then, you go back to the last game and you see more playing time from pretty much all of the starters as well. I wouldn't be surprised to see that trend continue. And it is going to make them look a little bit better, because this is a team that typically is sort of difficult to prioritize when they're all healthy. But if you do expect to see more playing time from those starters, it's going to look good. Klay Thompson, only $5,700. He's the only guy here pulling double-digit ownership on DraftKings. But I think Draymond looks fine at $5,800. I think Curry looks pretty good at 10-3. It's a pretty interesting team in tournaments, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of upside here. Nobody's mean projection is going to be spectacular looking. Klay Thompson does project fairly well on a points per dollar basis for me. But just the chance that you might be getting 38, 40 minutes out of some of these starters because the bench sucks so hard, that's going to make them a spot. And the other thing too, 231.5 total in this game. It's expected to be really high pace, really high scoring. I'm going to be getting to Warriors in tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, I had to double check to make sure that last game didn't go to overtime based on how many minutes they played.
Yeah, it's just because it's very rare that a bench for a team is so bad. They're like, all right, we're 3 weeks into the season, but we just have to play our starters 40 minutes now because we're going to lose if we go to the bench.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Kerr last game basically just resorted to the Nick Nurse rotation.
I wonder how much buyer's remorse the Warriors have about that Jordan Poole contract right now. And also how much they felt pressured to do it to keep him happy after Draymond Green punched him. Because then they think about the trickle-down effect. So Draymond Green punches him. Who knows what kind of locker room issues there were, or maybe that he was, just unhappy with the situation in general. They just threw a ton of money at Jordan Poole. And now it's kind of like, oh, right, Jordan Poole isn't that good. And they have this like $140 million committed to him. It's kind of been a disaster. But either way, it's leading to some potential value from the Warriors. One game left to talk about tonight. It's the final one, the Kings against the Lakers. On the Kings side of the game, we've got Malik Monk as one of the most popular plays on the slate. He's projected for 23% ownership. Domantas Sabonis, he is picking up ownership as well. He is at 17% over on DraftKings. FanDuel picking up 14% ownership. But first, starting with Malik Monk, who is popular right around 20% on both DraftKings and FanDuel. How do you like him as a cost-saving option?
He's another guy that I think right now looks like a good value. There's a good chance that as things open up later in the day, he becomes less useful. That's what we saw in the Kings last game. When we did the morning show, Monk was pulling, 15, 16% ownership, something like that. And I thought he looked like a good value. By the time we got the lock, he was like 5% owned and kind of just unnecessary. But as things look right now, I do like Monk. He's a good point per minute guy. He's getting enough minutes that he should be able to pay off the salary pretty easily. And he does have a favorable matchup here as well. Overall this season, 1.1 DraftKings points per minute, 23% usage rate, but also a 32.5% assist percentage. So not the same scoring dependent player that we'd gotten used to in the past. Still certainly capable of scoring, but also contributing in other ways.
Yeah, and then as for the rest of the guys on the team, Sabonis, Fox, Kevin Huerter, this is another game that's expected to be really high scoring. The highest priority for me right now, just based on the value that's available to us, Malik Monk is the player I got the most exposure to, but still, I was getting double-digit exposure to Sabonis, to Fox, to Huerter. Are these guys that you also like getting to?
Yeah, Sabonis, the only other guy getting double-digit ownership on DraftKings, which is kind of interesting because he hasn't really been popular very frequently this year. He is coming off of a game where he played 35 minutes, but I don't think that should surprise anybody because we know that's what he's going to do when he's not in foul trouble. He just fouls at a ridiculous rate when he's playing center, and obviously going up against an Anthony Davis-led front court, you do have that risk again today. But if Sabonis does avoid foul trouble, he's going to look really good at 8,500. De'Aaron Fox at 8,600 looks fine. The issue there is just that you do have a lot of other guards that look really good. If you want to use Barnes or Huerter for value, I think that's fine. But neither one is a priority. Neither one getting much ownership. I think right now it's Monk number one, and then Sabonis number two for me.
And then finally talking about the Lakers, who have no LeBron James again. The Lakers season, just has been a disaster to this point, which I think we should have expected coming into the year because they sucked last year. They made basically no change. If anything, they got worse because Malik Monk didn't come back. But basically, the Lakers' path to success this year was maybe neither LeBron James or Anthony Davis will get hurt at all, which was just such a tall order for both these guys. But for today, no LeBron. LeBron's going to miss at least the next couple of games, maybe even more. Anthony Davis, at least as right now, my favorite spend-up option on the slate.
Yeah, he looks really good. So far this year, 1.45 DraftKings points per minute in 119 minutes without LeBron, 29.5% usage rate. He's just going to look fantastic. He's 10,200 with power forward and center eligibility on DraftKings. So I think Davis looks great. He's only getting 9% ownership too, which is kind of interesting. I think Westbrook still looks good, 7,300. We know he's coming off the bench, but he is typically playing a lot of minutes off the bench. I would expect he gets at least 30 minutes here if this game's competitive. He has also averaged 1.46 DraftKings points per minute without LeBron on the floor. So those two guys look really good. Westbrook is pulling quite a bit more ownership than Davis. Outside of that, Beverly, Brown, Walker, all getting a little bit of ownership, all look reasonable. But to me, Westbrook and Davis are the guys that I really want to get to.
Yeah, and one other thing we should mention here, Lonnie Walker is questionable. If he is out, does that open up any value from the Lakers wings?
Potentially. So last game, you got Austin Reeves in the starting lineup. He played 35 minutes. He's always kind of a guy where you can't expect much out of him. He's averaging 0.6 DraftKings points per minute without LeBron on the floor this year, but he potentially could play a lot. Beverly played 34 minutes. Nunn barely played off the bench. I guess it would probably open up Austin Reeves and make Beverly and Brown look a little bit better.
All right. That is going to do it for us today, guys. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. A lot more content coming up on today. So we've got, on the contrary, the football show coming up next. And then, of course, later on the day, NBA Deep Dive, NBA Live Before Lock. So check out all of that later on the day. Hopefully I'll see you guys later. But good luck, and also have a great weekend.